It happened on March 18th, 2022, at exactly 7:43 p.m., in front of 26 people I had known my entire life. My father stood up from the dining table, tapped his glass with a spoon, and smiled the kind of smile that meant something ugly was coming. The room quieted. Even the kids stopped running. My aunt froze mid-pour with the tea kettle still tilted. "This," he said, pointing directly at me, "is what happens when you waste money on someone who refuses to educate themselves." A few people laughed nervously. Most didn't. I stayed seated, hands folded, calm. For 32 years, he continued louder now, I carried this burden. An uneducated child, no degree worth mentioning, no real career, no ambition, just excuses. He turned to my cousin. "Do you know how embarrassing it is to explain this to people?" Someone coughed. Someone else looked down at their plate. Then he said the word he knew would stick. Worthless. Not shouted, not whispered. Said cleanly, precisely, like a diagnosis. My mother didn't stop him. She never did. She just stared at the tablecloth, tracing the same wrinkle over and over with her fingernail. My older brother, my father's pride, shifted in his chair, uncomfortable but silent. He had learned early that silence was rewarded. I felt 26 pairs of eyes flick toward me, then away, then back again. Waiting for something. Tears, a breakdown, an apology. I gave them none. Because what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every insult he was throwing had already expired. He was humiliating a version of me that no longer existed. "I paid for tutors," he said, voice rising. "Test prep, community college, trade programs. And what did I get in return? Nothing. You still couldn't even finish a real degree." That was when he pulled the envelope from his jacket. Yellowed, thick, deliberate. "I kept records," he said proudly. "Every dollar wasted, every failure documented." He slapped it onto the table so hard the silverware jumped. The number written on the front was bold and underlined twice. "Nigh 300. I want everyone here to understand," he said, scanning the room, "that this is what enabling failure costs." No one spoke. The silence pressed against my ears until it rang. I looked around slowly, at my grandmother gripping her cane a little too tightly, at my aunt blinking back something she didn't want to feel, at my brother, still staring straight ahead. Then I looked back at my father. He was enjoying this. He always enjoyed this. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was the way my fingers rested. Steady, on my lap. No shaking, no panic, no shame. Because the envelope he was holding, I had already seen it. Years ago, in a very different context. And the truth inside it, the real numbers, the real names. The real story was the reason I was sitting there instead of walking out. He thought this was the end of me. He thought tonight was proof. He had no idea that in less than an hour, every single person in that room would understand exactly who I really was, and why he had spent my entire life trying to make sure I stayed silent. Before that night, before the envelope, before the glass tapping, before the word worthless landed on the table. Like a verdict, I lived a life, so quiet most people assumed. Nothing important was happening. That assumption worked in my favor. I woke up every morning at 5:10 a.m., not because I had to, but because I liked the silence before the world decided who I was supposed to be. I rented a modest one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a brick building that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old books. The heater clicked too loudly in winter. The balcony door stuck in summer. It was mine. I paid my bills 3 days early, always. I cooked simple meals, eggs, rice, vegetables. I didn't drink much, didn't post much, didn't explain myself to people who weren't asking honest questions. If you asked my father what I did for a living, he'd say, "Nothing stable." If you asked my mother, she'd say, "They're figuring things out." If you asked my brother, he'd shrug and say, "I don't really know." That part was true. He didn't know. My brother had followed the path my father approved of. Straight lines. Named schools, framed diplomas, the kind of success that looked impressive when described at family gatherings. My father loved saying his name out loud. He graduated top 10%. He works with important clients. He bought his house at 30. Each statement delivered like evidence, each comparison unspoken but clear. I wasn't jealous. Not anymore. Because while my brother chased approval, I chased competence. Quietly. I worked remotely, contract-based. My name wasn't on the door. But my work was everywhere. Systems that didn't break. Accounts that balanced down to the cent. Problems that disappeared after I touched them. I liked being invisible. Invisibility meant freedom. My mother knew just enough to feel uneasy. She'd ask vague questions over the phone. Are you okay financially? You sound tired. Are you working too much? Your father worries. She never asked what I did. She never asked how. I paid rent on time during months, when I was supposedly between things. She had spent her life smoothing surfaces, not looking underneath them. And my father only noticed me when he needed an example of what not to become. He'd call once every few months. Always the same rhythm. Still jumping around? You know your cousin just got promoted. I don't understand why you couldn't just finish properly. I'd let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I'd say, I'm doing fine. He hated that answer. It gave him nothing to attack. The truth was, my life was boring in the best way. Predictable, stable, intentional. I had learned slowly, painfully. That chaos felt familiar because I was raised in it, not because I needed it. So I built routines instead. Every Friday, I sent money to a savings account under a name my father had never seen. Every Sunday, I reviewed documents I hoped I'd never need. Every quarter, I met with professionals who knew me only by my first name and never asked about my family. I didn't talk about the past, not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer defined the present. The family gathering that night, the one on March 8th, was supposed to be simple. A combined birthday dinner, my aunt's house, potluck, nothing formal. My father insisted I come. You can't keep isolating yourself, he said. People are starting to ask questions. That should have been my first warning. When I arrived, my brother was already there, holding court near the kitchen island. Everyone laughing at something he'd said, my father's hand resting proudly on his shoulder. I slipped in quietly, took an empty chair, set my phone face down. No one made room for me. No one needed to. I wasn't there to be seen. At least that's what I thought. Because what I didn't realize, what I couldn't have known yet, was that my quiet life wasn't just tolerated by my father. It threatened him. Every unanswered question, every unexplained success, every time I didn't fail loudly enough for him to feel justified. That dinner wasn't a coincidence. It was a correction. And my father had decided, long before anyone sat down, that he was going to remind everyone exactly who he believed I was. He just didn't realize how much he had already taught me, especially about preparation. My father never hit me. That was the story my family told themselves whenever something felt off, whenever my voice went flat, whenever I stopped volunteering details about my life, whenever I flinched at praise. He means well. He's just blunt. That's how he motivates. Those sentences followed me through childhood like background noise. The first time I remember understanding the pattern, I was 9 years old. I had brought home a math test with a 19s written in red ink at the top. I stood in the doorway of the living room holding it out like proof of existence. My father glanced at it once. Where'd the other 8 points go? That was it. No anger, no shouting, just dismissal. He turned back to the television like the conversation was finished. I learned something important that day. Success didn't earn approval. It only reset expectations. By middle school, comparisons became currency. My brother's achievements were announced at dinner like weather updates. Your brother stayed late for extra practice. Your brother's teacher says he's gifted. Your brother doesn't complain. If I spoke up, my father would sigh, deep, performative. Why do you always make things difficult? I stopped asking for help after that. In high school, the stakes increased. My brother got a new laptop for college prep. I got his old one with a cracked hinge. When I asked if it could be fixed, my father laughed. Why bother? You're not exactly aiming high. I worked part-time jobs anyway. Stocking shelves, cleaning offices, saving quietly. Every dollar felt like leverage. Then came college, or what my father liked to call my phase. I enrolled locally to keep costs down. I took classes at night so I could work during the day. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. My father attended my brother's campus tours, took photos, asked questions, bragged to strangers. He never visited mine. When my schedule collapsed under the weight of work and coursework, I asked for one thing, just one: time. Maybe I could go part-time next semester, I said carefully. Just until I catch up. He didn't even look at me. So you're quitting? I didn't say... People like you always find an excuse. That phrase stayed with me. People like you. I withdrew 2 weeks later, picked up more hours, told myself it was temporary. My father told everyone I couldn't handle it. Years later, I found out he'd been telling a different version to my extended family, that he'd offered help, that I'd rejected it, that I was stubborn, unmotivated, difficult. Gaslighting doesn't always sound cruel. Sometimes it sounds reasonable, concerned, logical, especially when it's repeated by someone everyone else trusts. My mother watched all of this like a slow-motion accident. She believed she couldn't stop. She'd smooth things over afterward. He didn't mean it like that. You know how proud he is in his own way. Just don't provoke him. So I learned to disappear. I stopped sharing accomplishments because they were ignored. I stopped sharing failures because they were weaponized. When I moved out at Ward 24, my father didn't ask where I was going. He just said, "Don't expect us to bail you out." I never did. What hurt the most wasn't the insults. It was the consistency. The way the rules never changed, no matter how hard I tried to meet them. My brother could fail once and be comforted. I could succeed 10 times and still be a disappointment. Over time, I realized something worse. My father needed me to stay beneath him. My failure wasn't an accident. It was a role. And the more quietly I stepped out of it, the more aggressive his reminders became. That dinner on March 18th wasn't the first time he'd tried to humiliate me. It was just the first time he'd planned it in advance. And someone else in the room had started to notice. Someone who remembered things my father thought were buried. The invitation came 3 weeks before the dinner. A group message, all caps, too cheerful. Combined birthday. Dinner, March 18. 6:30 p.m., everyone attending. My father sent it himself. That alone was unusual. He normally delegated logistics to my mother, who preferred ambiguity. This was precise, timed, commanding. I stared at the date longer than I needed to. March 18th. It wasn't a milestone birthday. No round numbers. No anniversaries. No obvious reason to gather more than 24 relatives on a Friday night. Still, I said yes. Not because I wanted to go, but because I had learned that absence created stories I couldn't control. In the days leading up to it, small things began to feel off. My mother called twice in 1 week. That never happened. "You'll be there early, right?" she asked the first time. "Probably on time," I said. A pause. "Your father just wants everyone together," she added. "He's been reflective." Reflective wasn't a word she used about him. The second call came 2 nights later. "Maybe dress nicely," she said. "You know how people talk." I did know. I chose something simple, neutral, nothing that would invite comment. The house was already loud when I arrived. Too loud. The kind of forced cheer that fills space so no one has to think. My father greeted me with a nod. Not a hug, not a smile. "You made it," he said, like it was a test I'd barely passed. My brother arrived 10 minutes later. Late, but forgiven instantly. My father's face lit up when he saw him. There he is. The contrast was sharp enough to sting. As people settled in, I noticed my grandmother watching the room instead of participating. She sat near the corner of the table, hands folded over her cane, eyes alert. When she caught me looking, she held my gaze longer than necessary. Then she said quietly, "You've lost weight." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. "Work's been busy," I said. She nodded once. During dinner, my father controlled the conversation like a conductor. He steered praise toward my brother, steered jokes toward me. "Remember when they tried college? Some people just aren't cut out for academics. Book smarts aren't for everyone." Each comment landed softly enough to be dismissed. Collectively, they formed a shape I recognized. A setup. Across the table, my aunt shifted uncomfortably. My cousin avoided my eyes. My mother kept refilling glasses that didn't need refilling. And my grandmother? She stopped eating. Halfway through the meal, she leaned toward me. "Did he tell you to come tonight?" she asked. "Yes." Her grip tightened on the cane. "He likes an audience," she said. "Always has." Before I could respond, my father stood up to grab another bottle of wine. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. The room stilled instinctively. That's when I saw it, the envelope. It was tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket, just visible when he moved. Thick, worn at the edges, handwritten numbers bleeding through the paper. My stomach didn't drop. It went cold. Because I knew that envelope. I had seen it once before, years ago, by accident, in a place my father never expected me to look. I hadn't known what it meant then. I did now. My father returned to his seat, wine in hand, expression satisfied. "This is nice," he said. "Everyone together." He looked directly at me. "We should do this more often." My grandmother's voice cut through the moment, soft but steady. "Some things," she said, are better left unsaid in public. My father smiled at her, or finally said out loud. The clink of his glass followed, and I realized with a calm certainty that surprised me that he wasn't just planning to humiliate me, he was planning to rewrite history in front of witnesses. What he didn't know was that history had receipts, and they weren't all his. The spoon against the glass was deliberate. Not rushed, not angry, measured. Tap, tap. The room quieted in stages. Conversations trailing off. Chairs shifting. Someone's phone buzzing once before being silenced. 26 people turning their attention toward the same source. My father stood. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. I've been thinking a lot lately, he began, swirling the wine in his glass, about responsibility. No one interrupted him. What we owe our children, and what our children owe us. A few heads nodded. The safe opening, philosophical, harmless. Then he looked at me. And sometimes, he continued, we have to be honest about where our investments failed. The word investments hung in the air. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope. Yellowed, creased, heavy with intention. I kept track, he said calmly. Every class, every attempt, every dollar spent trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. He placed the envelope flat on the table and turned it so everyone could see the number, written across the front. Nigh 300. A murmur moved through the room like a draft. That, he said, tapping the number once, is the cost of pretending effort equals achievement. My mother's face went pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. My brother shifted, uncomfortable now, but still silent. My father continued. I didn't want to do this, he lied. But enabling failure helps no one. He turned to the room. Some people just aren't academic. They're not driven, and no amount of money changes that. Then he looked back at me. Tell them, he said. Tell them how many programs you dropped out of. I felt 26 pairs of eyes swing toward me. Waiting, I took a sip of water, set the glass down carefully. I don't think this is appropriate, I said evenly. A few people exhaled in relief. My father smiled. See, he said to them, always avoiding accountability. My grandmother gripped her cane so tightly her knuckles went white. My father flipped open the envelope and began pulling out papers. Receipts, bank statements, typed lists with bullet points, tutoring, 18 months, community college, 4 semesters, private exam prep. Each item read aloud like a charge. Still no degree, he concluded. Still no direction. Silence. Not supportive silence. Not angry silence. The kind that drains warmth from a room. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone else stared into their lap. No one defended me. I didn't speak. That confused him. He was used to reactions. Tears. Anger. Justifications. He thrived on them. So, he pressed, voice sharpening, what do you have to say for yourself? I folded my napkin, slowly. I have nothing to add, I said. The disappointment on his face was immediate. Of course you don't, he said, because there's nothing there. He raised his glass. To lessons learned. No one raised theirs. The silence stretched. Thick. Uncomfortable. Finally, my aunt cleared her throat. This feels harsh, she said. My father shrugged. Truth often does. I looked around the table one last time. At the faces that had known me my entire life. At the people who had watched this dynamic unfold and chosen comfort over courage. Then I stood. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. I think it's time I go, I said. My father laughed. Running away again? I met his eyes. No, I said. I'm giving you space. That unsettled him. As I reached for my coat, my grandmother spoke. Sit, she said to me, firm, commanding. I paused. Then she turned to my father. You've said your piece, she said. Now let them speak. The room froze. My father frowned. Who? He asked. She looked at me and nodded. That was the first time anyone in that family had ever publicly given me the floor. And my father didn't realize yet that the silence he'd created was about to turn on him. If you were sitting at that table, would you have spoken up or stayed quiet too? I sat back down. Not because I was told to, but because for the first time, the room wasn't his anymore. My grandmother didn't look at me again. She kept her eyes on my father, daring him to interrupt. He didn't. He smiled instead, thin and confident, like someone who believed they had already won. Go on, he said. Explain. I reached into my bag and placed a slim folder on the table. Gray, unmarked, clean. Not dramatic, intentional. I wasn't planning to do this tonight, I said. My voice didn't shake. But since numbers matter so much to you, I think it's important everyone sees the full picture. My father leaned back in his chair. This should be good. I opened the folder. The amount you quoted, I continued. 90,400. That number isn't wrong. He smirked. What is wrong, I said, is what you say it represents. I slid the first document forward. A bank statement, enlarged, highlighted. This account, I said, tapping the page. It was opened in my name in June of 2009. I was 19. I did not open it. The room stirred. It received deposits labeled as education expenses, tuition, tutoring, exam fees. I turned the page. And withdrawals. Exact dates. Exact amounts. Those withdrawals, I said, were not made to schools. They were transferred to an account ending in 0. My father's smile tightened. That account, I added, belongs to you. A chair creaked loudly as someone shifted. I didn't know about this account until 2018, I said, when a lender asked me to explain why my education fund had been emptied. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. I kept going. Over 9 years, zindagi 1400, labeled as education expenses, was diverted. I slid another page forward. This one shows late fees, penalties, tax implications. I looked directly at him now. I paid those. The room was completely silent. You told everyone I couldn't finish school, I said. What you didn't tell them is that the money earmarked for it was gone before I ever had a chance. My brother stared at the table, hard. My aunt whispered, Is that true? My father laughed once, sharp. This is absurd, he said. I managed that money. Families do that. Families don't reroute funds into personal investment accounts, I replied. I placed the next document down. This is a loan I took out at 122. Because my tuition payment bounced. The dates lined up, so I worked more, I said. I cut classes. I fell behind. I looked around the table. That wasn't failure. That was damage control. My father stood up abruptly. You're twisting things, he snapped. You were never serious about school. I didn't raise my voice. I was serious enough to keep every record. I turned another page. This is the first notice I received for unpaid taxes on income I never earned. My grandmother inhaled sharply. That income, I said, was reported under my Social Security number. It came from your consulting work. My father went very still. That's impossible, my mother whispered. No, I said. It's documented. I placed the final sheet down. An official letter, letterhead unmistakable. I didn't bring this to shame anyone, I said. I brought it because tonight you decided to make my life public. I looked at my father one last time. So let's be accurate. The room didn't feel tense anymore. It felt recalibrated. My father glanced around looking for support. None came. For the first time in my life, the numbers weren't being used against me. They were standing between us, and they were on my side. The room didn't erupt. It fractured, quietly at first. My father didn't shout. He didn't lunge. He didn't deny anything outright. He did something far more revealing. He sat down, slowly, carefully, like someone recalculating the floor beneath them. This is a misunderstanding, he said at last. You don't know the whole story. My grandmother let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Oh, she said, I think we finally do. Everyone turned to her. She pushed her chair back and stood, steadying herself with the cane. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried in a way that silenced the room without effort. There was always a reason you were treated differently, she said, looking not at me, but at my father. My heart skipped. What are you talking about? My aunt asked. My grandmother didn't answer her. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. Old, worn thin from being opened and closed too many times. I kept this, she said, because I knew one day lies would collapse under their own weight. She placed the paper on the table and slid it toward me. It was a birth certificate, not the one I grew up with. This one had handwritten notes in the margins, corrections, dates, and a name listed under father, not his. The air left my lungs. My mother made a small sound and covered her mouth, eyes filling instantly. My father stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. That's enough, he said. This has gone too far. No, my grandmother said. It went too far 32 years ago. She looked at me then, softened. You were never his failure, she said. You were his reminder. The room buzzed with confusion. What does that mean? My cousin asked. My grandmother turned back to my father. Tell them, she said, or I will. He didn't, so she did. You were already married, she said calmly. Already trying to build the life you wanted people to believe in. Then your affair came back with consequences. My mother's knees buckled slightly. My brother reached for her instinctively. You demanded control, my grandmother continued. Not because you loved this child, but because you were afraid of what would happen if the truth came out. I stared at the paper in front of me. Every memory realigned. The distance, the contempt, the obsession with erasing me. You didn't want them to succeed, she said. You wanted them small, quiet, grateful. My father finally spoke. They weren't supposed to know, he said. Any of it. My grandmother's voice hardened. And yet you built their entire life around punishing them for existing. My brother looked up, eyes wide. You're saying that they are not who you told people they were, she said, and never have been. I felt strangely calm, not relieved, not angry, clear. The mystery of my childhood, the invisible line I could never cross, suddenly made sense. You didn't sabotage me because I failed, I said quietly. My father didn't look at me. You sabotaged me because I survived. That was when the room truly broke. Some people stood. Some cried. Some demanded answers my father could no longer control. My mother whispered my name like she was seeing it for the first time. And my father, he had no apology, no explanation, only fear, because the story he had built his authority on had just collapsed. And there was no version of the truth left where he came out clean. If you had just learned your entire childhood was engineered to erase you, what would you do next? No one told my father to leave. That was the part he didn't understand. In his world, confrontation always ended with someone else backing down, someone else smoothing things over, someone else absorbing the damage so the room could return to normal. But the room had changed. My grandmother sat back down slowly, like a judge taking her seat after testimony. She didn't look at my father when she spoke next. I warned you, she said, years ago. My father stared at her, stunned. This is a family matter. It stopped being that when you used money, lies, and fear to control a child, she replied. She turned to the rest of the table. You all wondered why they were treated differently, she said. Why nothing they did was ever enough. Now you know. My aunt wiped her eyes. My cousin shook his head, muttering under his breath. The room no longer felt confused. It felt aligned. My mother finally spoke. Her voice was small. You told me they quit, she said to my father. You told me they wasted everything. My father didn't answer. You let me believe that, she whispered. That silence did more damage than any argument could have. My brother stood up next, slowly, carefully. I defended you, he said to my father. Every time someone questioned it. My father looked at him, searching for loyalty. I believed you, my brother continued. And you made me complicit. That word landed hard. My grandmother tapped her cane once on the floor. This ends tonight, she said. She looked directly at my father. You will return every dollar taken under their name, she said. With interest, he scoffed. You don't have that authority. She smiled faintly. No, she said. But the courts do. And so do the tax agencies whose letters you've been ignoring. The color drained from his face. I have already spoken to a lawyer, she added. Not theirs, mine. No one gasped. No one interrupted. It felt inevitable. You will not contact them again, she continued, nodding toward me. Not privately, not through others. She turned to me then. You owe him nothing, she said. Not explanations. Not forgiveness. I nodded. Not because it felt dramatic, but because it felt true. My father looked around the table one last time. No one met his eyes. The authority he had curated for decades dissolved without ceremony. No shouting, no escort, just absence. He picked up his jacket. The envelope fell out as he did. Papers scattered across the floor. No one helped him gather them. When the door closed behind him, the house exhaled. Not in relief. In finality, I didn't feel victorious. I felt light. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, speaks clearly, and leaves nothing left to argue. And for the first time in my life, I was no longer waiting for permission to exist. The weeks after that night were strangely calm. Not peaceful, calm, like the stillness that follows a storm. Once the debris has settled and the sky hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. I didn't hear from my father again. Not a call, not a message, not even through someone else. At first I waited for it, the familiar spike of anxiety, the instinct to prepare defenses, but the silence held. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. My life didn't fall apart. It stabilized. The legal process unfolded the way legal processes do. Slowly, methodically, without emotion. The numbers my grandmother had demanded back were acknowledged. Accounts were frozen. Corrections filed. Timelines reconstructed. I wasn't involved beyond what was necessary. That was a choice. I had spent too many years explaining myself to someone who benefited from not understanding. I wasn't interested in doing it again, this time in a conference room. Instead, I focused on what had always been quietly mine. My work continued. Contracts renewed. One expanded into a long-term agreement. I didn't celebrate loudly. I updated a spreadsheet, adjusted projections, moved forward. I bought a car, used, reliable, paid in full. It wasn't impressive. It was mine. My credit report finally reflected reality instead of distortion. I watched numbers normalize the way you watch a wound close. Slow, almost boring, but deeply satisfying. On Sundays, I stopped reviewing documents out of fear. I kept them, but they no longer ruled my attention. My mother tried to reach out. Carefully. Gently. Like someone approaching a door they weren't sure they were allowed to knock on. We met once. Neutral place. Coffee shop. Late morning. She cried, apologized, explained. I listened. Not because I needed her explanation, but because I needed to hear my own. Boundaries out loud. I don't hate you, I told her. But I won't pretend you didn't see things you chose not to see. She nodded. That was all. We speak now. Occasionally. Honestly. Without pretending. We're something we're not. My brother reached out too. His message was short. I didn't know. But I should have asked more questions. We met for a walk. No family history. No accusations. Just two adults recalibrating. A relationship that had never been allowed to exist on equal ground. We're not close, but we're real. My grandmother and I speak every week. Sometimes about practical things. Sometimes about nothing at all. She never asks me to forgive. She never asks me to reconcile. She just reminds me quietly that survival is not a debt. The strangest part came one evening when I realized something had changed inside me. I was filling out a form, one of those that asks for parental information. And for the first time, my hand didn't hesitate, not because I felt resolved, but because the answer no longer defined me. I stopped rehearsing imaginary conversations, stopped preparing defenses for attacks that weren't coming, stopped explaining my choices to people who hadn't earned the context. I slept better, not longer, deeper. The story of my life didn't end with confrontation. It continued with competence, with stability, with days that didn't feel like tests. The truth is, I didn't need to reveal who I was to be worthy. I needed to stop allowing someone else to tell the story for me. My father built his identity on control. When it collapsed, he had nothing left to stand on. I built mine on quiet persistence. When the truth came out, it held. That's the difference. I didn't win. I reclaimed. And that reclamation didn't look like triumph. It looked like peace. If you've ever been told, explicitly or subtly, that your value depended on someone else's approval, ask yourself this. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting for permission to be real? Because the moment I did, everything finally became mine.